that the Kesher, which is the Inyan Harotzen, was Lamaila mi Inyan Hazman. We brought down L'chol Tiklo. We saw from the Medrash Rabbah there was Sikusim. And the Matnas Kahuna takes that the word Sikusim had in itself also the biur of time. It meant limitation, and he added to the concepts which indicate limitation also the idea of Zman. So we're not going to deal at length with that suggestion on the part of the Matnas Kahuna that the limitation in the Bria, the koyach, what you might call a hakabala, and limit in the Bria is connected principally in a way with Zman. And if it's already connected with Zman, then it'll be connected with the concept of limitation in a more simple sense. The Inyan of Rotzen we saw, however, the Rotzen was what we call a Hamshocha Ner Lemes. It's a Hamshocha, but it's still Kolu in its Mokya in such a way that it's Nela, Gabi the Madregas, Hatatinas, and the Madregas of all the Makablim, and so therefore it's called two words which somewhat are like contradictory or paradoxical one to the other, Hamshocha Ner Lemes. However, that's the Nakuda of Rotzen, and we saw that it was due to the fact that it has that is colorless in the Atzmiyas of its source, and it's the Madrega, for instance, Nimshach, that what causes it to be in a state of Havdola from the Inyan of Metzias Oyer. Therefore, the Rotzen, albeit is a Inyan from Oyer, but it's not a Metzias Oyer because it's not Pkinas Gilui Oyer. So therefore, said the Rebbe, the Inyan from Rotzen, B'chol Partzuf. Now, we're going to use this word Partzuf on numerous occasions, so we'll just give another brief biur that we've explained. Partzuf meaning features. You can call a person's face his Partzuf. That means a group of detailed inyonim which add together to form a united influence. So like we see a person's face, for example, the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the forehead and other aspects, they all add together to make the impression of what he looks like. And you can also tell, as is well known, HaKodesh Ponov Onsabai, that certain things in the makeup of a person's face tell the observer what about him or what he's like, and so on and so forth. As is well known, the famous, we seem to be very sort of missing people tonight. Huh? What's that about? There's usually been another 3 people at least in the class. Huh? Shows? I didn't mean him. I meant a few, God forbid, I didn't mean anything bad. But he wasn't the one I was referring to. There's about another 3 regulars that are not here. Anyway, it's possible to read in a person's face. There's a very famous Inyan brought down in the Zohar Kodesh, which is called Chochmas HaPartzuf, that there's a wisdom of studying somebody's character from his face. You know, if you study his face carefully enough, you can see. And there's certain, and therefore we see that the Benegir, like we saw earlier, Benegir to the Gile HaChochma, HaChochmas Odom Toir Panav, that when a person is connected and strongly devoted and then rooted in Chochmah, then that lights up his face. There's a certain recognition in the face of the Gilei Chochmah. Therefore, somebody who's a Chocham Amiti, it can be noticed in his face. So therefore, the inyan of the word Partzuf carries that with it. It carries the idea of details which make up a general effect. So therefore, the eyes, as we pointed out, and the other aspects of the features of the face, they lead to the general effect, which is called Partzuf. So So we'll see as we go along, wherever we have groups of spheres, what their inyan is a inyan mishutaf. In other words, they have a general effect, even though they have details within them. But those details add up to a general effect, but all in a certain area. For example, Chochmah Bina Das, or Keser Chochmah and Bina, they're sometimes referred as Partzuf HaMoichin. In other words, there's a lot of details in that. There's a detail in Chochmah, detail in Bina. If we count Keser in it, then Chitonius HaKeser at least, there's a lot of inyonim in Chitonius HaKeser. In Das, there's a lot of inyonim. All those inyonim linked together are called a Partzuf, and they make up a general effect. That's the inyan of brain power or brain effect, Moichin, Beifin Kloli. The Midos, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, they are also called Zohar. That's called Partzuf Zohar, because the Midas are all different details, but they all add together to lead to a general effect, which is called the emotional effect, or the aspect of the inyan of feeling within the Adam, and how it is l'mayra din of the ashpoa mitzad the inyan of Midas. So that's also a Partzuf. Then you have what's called Partzuf HaNukva, that even Malchus Bifnei Atzma is called a Partzuf in a way, because Malchus is also made up of all the other spheres. This is well known in a different way to what the other spheres are, and he does the task of giving over the beginning of the whole Shefar into Olam Bria Yetzirah Asiya. So therefore it's a whole Partzuf in its own right, the inyan from Partzuf HaMalchus or Partzuf HaNukva. And so there, at each stage, we have these Partzufim in the Chlolos HaSpheres, and we have a Keser for each of those Partzufim. So that's what the Rebbe means by saying, and we'll see that more as we go along, the Partzuf having its own particular Keser. That's what the Rebbe says, that the inyan of the Keser is l'mayla mi'azman lefi erech ha'partzuf hahu, according to the level of that particular Partzuf that we're talking about. Because to say that the inyan of Keser is l'mayla mi'azman, in certain areas that means a simple type that is mamish l'mayla mi'azman. For example, if we take within Atzilus, as we'll see, or from the Keser of Atzilus to Atzilus, then it's completely beyond the whole idea of time, because time didn't begin there yet, B'chlal. And even within Atzilus, we're going to see that there's a relative concept of time, but the Keser of each Madrega is l'mayla mi'azman hahu, which is shot to that particular part. But if we get lower down, then when we say that the Keser is l'mayla mi'azman, Lagabi, that particular Partzuf, then we mean it more in a relative way, that it's a huge inyan in Zman or inyan in Klolias Azman. For example, if we say that the Eibishter, one day by the Eibishter is 1,000 years. That's what down in Tehillim, Elef Shona, B'einecho Kiyem Esmael, that in your eyes, meaning the eyes of the Eibishter, then 1,000 years is like yesterday, like the day of yesterday. What that indicates a tremendous klolos in Zman, but nonetheless already a inyan of the counting some way of Zman. So the Rotzen beneged to every Partzuf is l'mayla mizman according to that particular level of that inyan of that Partzuf. And that's what we'll see as we go along. More examples and more details of that. Dehine yadua d'Zman hu b'bria. It's well known that the principal concept of Zman already begins in Elama Brio. The Zman and the concept of Shit Alfei Shnin Hu Mihascholas Hisavas Habrio Loi Me'atzilas Hainu Shaloi Nechshav Hashit Alfei Shnin Mishanetzel Atzilas HaElyoin Ki'im Mibrio. Now this is the famous statement that the Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin, that the world is going to last 6,000 years. Shit alfei shnin dahavi alma. It's written in the Gemara Sanhedrin. So how do they use the old expression, we're running out of? They were running out of time. You guys, maybe I sometimes just I feel that I'm a little bit too sort of serious most of the time for the guys around here, but every now and then when I do try to be a little bit humorous, nobody seems to take it. Is that we seem to be running out of time. It reminds me when I saw these guys. I mean, they died out very soon in my boyhood. You never saw them anymore. But you read about them in these, what's his name now, the famous storyteller in America. What was his name? He was a guy, but he wrote these wonderful stories. You know, got all these poor guys that get picked up on the street. You know, they don't. What's it used to be called? No visible means of support. You know, you guys don't know all these stories. You know, once upon a time in America, a cop could arrest somebody if he didn't have any what was called visible means of support. If he had no indication of how he was living, that he was considered you know, what do you call it, something that soaks from the public. What do you call it? I've forgotten my English. Terrible. He was considered you know, what's it? Anyway, yeah, so he was arrestable. Anyway, so he got this guy wrote all these stories about all these guys, you know, on the streets, and they used to be arrested by the cops. And they used to get involved in all sorts of things, but always ended up good. And it was like Charlie Chaplin a little bit, you know. It always ended up good and always had a moral and all this sort of stuff. Can't talk with you guys. Can't even get you to help me to remember. But anyway, that's what's got to do with Bria. I can't figure it out. How do I get onto that? Huh? Oh yeah, running out of time. Yeah. So he was a. Oh yeah. So he writes about these guys that used to walk around with these, you know, like two boards on them, you know, billboards. You know, it used to be written, you know, the world is doomed. You know, 2 weeks and, you know, doom and all sort of things. You know, in another 3 days, it's going to be the world's going to explode or something. You'd walk around, everybody peer at these things, you know. Then 3 days later, you know, you meet him and he's crossed out, you know, 3 days, and he says, in another short time, you know. Or, you know, we've changed our view, you know, it's not going to be destroyed, but it's going to change. So I remember seeing one of these guys that used to walk around with these billboards, you know. So it used to be written, you know, we're running out of time, you know, do something, you know. It was always slightly horrifying, you know. So we're running out of time, you know. Shidal Pishnin, Tahavi Alma. That's the Gemara. It's only in the last 6,000 years. And then Be'elef Hashvi, the Gemara said it's going to be like destroyed, the whole world. The simple text of the Gemara is that it's going to be in another oifen altogether. And the Chassidus teaches that that means that it's going to be Makabel from Chochmah, not Bina. That the whole world is going to be Makabel only from Chochmah without going through Bina. In other words, Bina pulls everything down into a certain Metzias, makes everything into a certain, you know, Metzias and a certain order, and a Chochmah is, you know, completely and utterly L'mayla Mikola Inyon Dveikis and Nakuda and Bitl Atzmi and all. So the world's going to be in a state of Bitl Atzmi Telekus. It's not going to make sense. Anyway, that's what I'm telling you what's written in Chassidus, as they state. So that's the Elef Hashvi. That's the 7,000. And the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, in the famous little Hagor, in Perek Lamed Vav, the Alter Rebbe writes over there that in the Elef Hashvi you want to get the emes of Schach for the mitzvah. So maybe I can interest you guys a little bit with that everybody's going to get the real reward for the mitzvahs.
So we have to wait.
You got to wait till the 7,000 year, my son. Be patient. That's when you're going to get. No, that's not written here. Daniel, don't frown. That's not written here. I just added that.
In the last line. The last line we learned. The last line we learned.
Yeah, we also mentioned.
Oh,
Chef, somebody's able to quote me what we had in the last line. I'll tell you.
But we also said that the schar is the mitzvah itself.
Huh?
We said that the schar is the mitzvah itself.
Yeah, sure. Emes Lamita. Yeah. And that's also, that Indian is also shy to what we're just talking now. That'll be the emphasis of the mitzvahs. Or maybe we could learn it another way, but anyway, whatever. So the Sheet Alfei Shnin, that's the 6,000 years, which there is normal time. That's what the Gemara means. In the 7,000, even though we call it the 7,000, it's going to be like a different system altogether, so maybe even the time will be different. And as I said, the Rebbe, from the moment that there was a creation of Brio, the Eibishter made a stop in Atzilas, and he said, Yesh mi'ayin, well, that's when you start to count these 6,000 years. He said, Loi me'atzilas, not from the level of Olam ha'atzilas, which is still Elakuth. It's not the Yesh coming into being. Hainu shalei nechshav hashit alfei shnin mishener tzal atzilas ha'elyon. We don't count the 6,000 years only from the coming into being of the Atzilus ha'elyon. Now that expression, Atzilus ha'elyon, is an expression in the Sifrei HaKabbalah. And we call Atzilus ha'elyon because it's mudal from the whole idea of Olam. Because Olam is Yesh, and Yesh is Olam in Lashon Helem. Atzilus is from Lashon Eitzel v'Korev, or from Lashon Hafrosha. It's Mamish Elakus, it's Mamish Nia and Kolul in the Eibishter, or it's just like a separation from his essence, B'derech ha'or atzmius mimeno. Therefore that's completely Elyon compared to the Olamats. Therefore it's called Atzilus ha'elyon. And ever said the Rebbe, from the moment, and we've got to be careful what we say. So we start using the word time, we're going to get into problems here. If we say from the time that Atzilus was Netzal, then that's not what he means. Or from the point, or from that level on which Atzilus ha'elyon was brought about as a Netzal, it was made close to Hashem or brought out from Hashem in the way of Atzilus. He said we can't count the 6,000 years from that point. Kiim mi brio. We can only count it from Bereshis bara Elokim Eisa Shamayim Veisa Oretz Yesh Miha Ayin. Where we have the movement from the absolute Ayin, meaning the nothingness of Elokus, meaning the not Shaykhs to Matziyah, into Yesh, that's where we can start counting time. Ki Atzilus Hula Maila Miha Zman. Being as it is Elokus, and being as it is included within the simplicity of Hashem's being, then it can't be time, because it's Him. Just like He's not time, so it's also not time. Ulazais einoi nechshav azman mi'atzilus olam ha'atzilus. And therefore we can't count time from that point. I'm not going to use the word moment. From that point where Atzilus came about, we cannot yet count time. Now that means, you see, and here we begin to talk on like two interesting paradoxical levels. There, for sure, we have to say, and it's true to say, that there was a point, I'm not saying time, but there was I won't use the word was, there's points where there was no Atzilus. I mean, Atzilus came about. It wasn't always, as you might say, it is not always, or it is not Hashem in the sense of His simplicity. Right? He brings out Atzilus from Himself. So in that respect, there's like a time when there was absolute void, and then there's a time of Atzilus. So in that respect, there's time. But what we're saying is that it's L'mayla me'azman. So it's difficult to picture how things like were not, but then they were, but they're not included in time. And that's the trick of this whole piece. Atzilus is a very amazing trick, because on the one hand, Atzilus is Elakus, and yet on the other hand, it's Oiris and Kalim. It's all sorts of nuances which come from the shleimus of Elokus, but they're all sort of linked together in a way to produce effects in the world of the creation. So therefore Atzilus is not creation, but it's for creation. It's in order to bring about the concept of creation. So therefore Atzilus is like a difficult middle point. And therefore the Rebbe said that we can't reckon time from that point of the coming about of Elam Atzilus, it's only from the moment of the actual Bria, Yesh Min Ha'ayin, that the Eibster created the Yesh HaNivro. Yeah, and that's where we got the two new contrasting concepts, Atzilus and Nivro. But Atzilus means that which is close and, as we said before, Kol in his being. Nivro means it has been created. It's a created entity. As if you say that it's a created entity, then you're implying that it's like separate from him. As if it's separate from him, then it can't be. But it can. Hashem can do everything. He can make something look as if it's separate from him, even though it's not really. And so that's the whole secret of the Bria. The truth of the matter is, it's only Ligabi us that it's separate. Or as far as he's concerned, it's just like Atzilus. In other words, there's no real Bria. But there is. Because it's like a play, Ligabi, that's Perikof Aleph and Perikof Beis in Tanya. If you look in Tanya, you see in Perikof Aleph, the Alter Rebbe reaches the conclusion that nothing ever happened. That all the Aces didn't really speak, and they didn't go out, and Hashem never really did do anything, can't say anything, so try it. And Mela, everything just appears for the sake of the Makablim, but it doesn't really happen. And then he goes on in Perikof Beis, and he says that there was a Yeridus Ha'er, Kikein Hu B'emes, Shahad Nivro Hu Yesh Mi'ayv, Klippers, and he goes on to describe all the Klippers and how they're against the Lakus, and he says, Kain Hu B'emes. How can you possibly every cake and eat it too? In Perikof always don't know nothing is there, and then he said, Kain Hu B'emes, that it is. So it all depends which way you're talking. That Kain Hu B'emes means mitzad the Mekablim, mitzad outside, it is true. But that's not true. It is, because since Hashem wants it to be that way, mitzad is a tav, then it is true. Even though Ligabi him, it doesn't really happen. It's not trying to say it's not true. It's just not happening. It's only happening Ligabi to Mekablim.
But there is no truth aside for the Eibishter.
Eh?
There is no truth aside for the Eibishter. So
As far as the Eibishter,
whether we receive it or not, there's no truth.
I can't hear you above this air conditioning.
There's no truth besides the Yesh.
I don't turn them off because of that, but I mean, don't turn them off.
That's basically turning it off.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah. The line of Gemina as to which way it's being received. There's no truth aside for the Eibishter.
No truth inside the Eibishter.
Besides.
Shayach.
Besides.
Besides, oh yeah. No truth besides the Eibishter. Avade. No, that because we're talking about absolute truth, or the truth out is mitzad the nivra. You understand? The truth out is, as far as we're concerned, is one thing, but absolute, unchangeable truth is only Shaykh and Hashem. And that's what the Gemara calls emes for emes lamite. It's called this truth, and then it's the truth of truth. So truth means relative truth. So we have relative truth. But absolute truth is only by Hashem.
Okay, we said before Atzilus, no time.
Right.
So there is something before
No, we're saying even in Atzilus.
Even
it's not-
Atzilus.
Yeah.
But there's Atzilus and there's something before Atzilus.
That's what I'm saying. I try to point that out to you before.
No, but I'm
Right.
having trouble stopping it.
Yeah, right.
If
So-
there's before and after,
Right.
that indicates some sort of sequence.
See, what it means is that there are certain things like nuance within Hashem. You understand? He allowed certain things to literally appear and reappear or not appear within himself. But you see, what it really means is that all these things, what is time? We're going to see in a second. Time is the idea of interdivision. When you have like what's called interseparation from level to level, then you can talk about time. Because what is time? Time is that this moment is now, the next moment is another moment, then the moment after that is another moment. What that means, the idea of interdivision. Have you got me? Oh, but just if we can imagine everything happening at once, everything just sort of happens without any interdivision. Yeah? It's all just happening without any interdivision. Then we can picture this idea of things happening without time. Because what happens by Hashem is not really shot to say that he was or he is or he's going to be. He's just what he is. Can you understand what I'm saying? And therefore, whatever happens within him happens at the same time as him. It's not really shot to say it happened at a later point. Can you understand me? And that's that's what the Rambam writes, and therefore the Rambam is so unbelievable. The Rambam writes at the beginning that the Rambam says that Kol HaNivroim, V'Kol HaNimtzoim, Bein HaShamayim V'Bein HaOretz, V'Kol Asher B'Teichom, V'Kol Asher Beineihem, Lo Nimtzau Ela Mi'amitas Himotza'oi. They did not, and he says in the Shlila, they were not brought about only from the Amitas Himotza'o, from the genuineness of his being there. Amitas Himotza'oi. In other words, the genuineness of his being found there. You got the point? In other words, that the Eibush is not there. He's just there. He has been. He's just found there. No, he's just nimtza. It's not that he ever was or he was. Can you understand? He just that. And since we're limited, finite beings in time, it's very hard for us to understand how something is just nimtza. If you got to the point of this word, it's just there. Not that it ever came about, or not that it never started or never finished. That's also not right. It's just there. Nimta. And that's the Rambam. He said, Amitas Himotzoi. In that gufa, there's and therefore he says, Kol HaNivroim, Kol HaNimtzoim, Loi Nimtzo. They didn't really come about. How can they be there if that's the case? Oh, Amitas Himotzoi, that his genuine being gives them the right to be. But they're not really, because they're alone in time. You follow? So I agree that the key point to many of these ideas is this idea of Lamai Lamai. And that's why it's very important here to try and help the nuance. So what it really means is that things by the Eibishter before Atzilas don't go with a chronological movement. They just go because of his way of being that we can't possibly grasp. It's what's called himato. He's being there. He's always been there. And therefore, if you look at our sages, they often use the expression, and they don't say who's ever been there, always been there. They say Galui v'yadua lefono. They say this is known and revealed in front of him. So Chassidus explains in other Maimorim, why don't they just say he knows? Why do I say Galui v'yadua? In the past, participle. Galui means it is revealed, it has been revealed. Yadua, it has been known. Can you understand me? So what they mean to say why that is, that not that he ever knew, and he started to know, it's just always been that way. Yeah, in other words, that you came about in time, but he knew about you eternally. Can you understand? How can that possibly be? Because he's in a state which is beyond our ability, due to our finiteness in Zman, to appreciate how there can be this whole concept of just being there. And that's why we keep using these expressions, both particularly in the Rambam on many occasions. He uses these expressions which are like past, and in reference to the being as it created, he uses it in a negative way. Yeah? And then he just says that the Eibishter is he who's always been there, or he has been. He doesn't say he is, or he is and he isn't. He just says that he's always been there. That's another idea. That means not ever started, not ever Finished. And therefore, Chassidus says that the emes greatness of Hashem is not that he's Ein Sof. And that's the fact that we call the Eibishter Ein Sof, which is a name given by the Zohar Kodesh and later by the great Mekubalim. Well, that's a way of referring to Hashem, but it's not his real description. The real description of Hashem is Ein Lo Tchila. Understand? He never began. He never began. Ein Lo Tchila. And later on here in Tzom Vov, we're going to meet it. Later on here, Mamish, I don't know if we'll meet it in our classes because we're going to have white beards by the time we get a bit ahead of the section. But, I mean, I've already got one, but you guys are, as Daniel's not doing too bad over there. It's, that's the whole idea of the greatness of the Rambam, that he uses these expressions which indicate that the Eibishter just didn't begin. It's not. We don't even talk about him not finishing. And so the reason is that there can be a lot of things which began, but they will never finish, because Hashem placed within them certain powers that they're like eternal, because they're connected with Him. So therefore He gave them certain powers. And that's why we use the expression that says Uyer Ein Sof. Uyer Ein Sof, which means that the Uyer, once again, in inverted commas, came about. The Uyer is something that Hashem gave off from His essence. Can you understand me? The Uyer went off from Hashem's essence. And now it is Ein Sof. It will always be everlasting. It will never stop. But it somehow or another is dependent in Him. Have you got the idea? It came from Him, or He makes it, or He gives it forth, or however. But He Himself didn't ever begin. And if you say that, it holds the whole. If you start working on the idea that He never started, then you'll see that changes your whole attitude incomparably more than if you say He never finished it. Try it, and you'll see. And that's really the emes and Nekuda. And that helps us to understand this whole idea of beyond time. Because he never starts, so it's not safe to say that He ever finishes B'der Mamecha, and He's just not in time, and therefore things that happen within His government are not in time. They're under the omnipotence of His being, and therefore, some of the great early Rishonim, they use the expression that the Eibishter is Nimtzo B'ofen shel bilti metzias Nimtzo. He's to be found, but not in the way of an entity that's found. He's not an entity. He's just found. He's just there, but not in the way of an entity. And that's the whole trick to it. Therefore, it's hard for somebody whose whole being is time to picture that idea of L'mayla me'atzma. That's a Nekuda, and it's in that lotion of the Rambam. Mitas himotzoi, the genuineness of Him just being there. And therefore, we as creations learn Him to. Legavi that we're not really there. Right. So therefore He said, well, now we meet up here. We have to put on our hats and hope that we'll blow to this one. Ubizeh yituratz kushias hachoiklim. With this basis that we just put down, it will be answered the famous kasha of the inquirers, meaning, like the thinkers by way of seichel. Inquirers by way of seichel. I don't want to use the word philosophers, because the chokrim can mean Chachmei Yisrael, that they were within the Kedusha. But they set out their task to explain things in Torah according to reasoning. So they're called Chokrim. So he said, with this we'll be able to answer the kushia of the Chokrim. Lama niro olam b'zeh hasman. Why was the world created at this time? V'loi b'zman hakodem, but not at an earlier time. Why did the Eibishter choose this moment to create His world? What about all the other millions of thousands of years or whatever He's been there and He hadn't created the world? What all of a sudden prompted Him to create the world at this point? You follow? So that question only makes any sense if you put the Eibishter in with everything we said. In other words, you put Him into time and into the limitation of time. and into the passage of time, and into the idea of the interdivision of entities, and then you can say, well, why did he do it at this point and not at an earlier point? But if we say that Eibishter is completely beyond time, that he himself is L'mayla Legamri min Zman, and so even is Atzilus, and the whole Inyan von Zman began at a certain point. So when that Zman began at that particular point, the Eibishter made Zman. But not that he's in Zman, that you can ask him why did he do it at that point. He just decided at a certain point that there would be, not at a certain point, he decided that there would be Zman. After that, there's Zman, but prior to that, there's no Zman. It doesn't make any sense to ask why did he create it at a certain time. Because he himself is B'klal not in the Inyan of time. And therefore the only way you can ask that shaila is if you consider Hashem just relatively greater than all the other Nimtzoyim.
If you say that it welled up in him to do this, then it implies that there was a time where it
yeah, once again we meet up with that whole idea I just explained. That he's Nimtza, he's there. So he's there in a way that we don't appreciate. So all these things that went up into him, they all occurred like at once, even though they're not at once necessarily, but they're not within time. And on the contrary, he determined and created time. Now this is not so, this whole concept is not so, it wasn't always so accepted. And the Mezritcher Maggid is a famous biur in the Mezritcher Maggid. But he explained this whole idea of Zman being a Nivro Yesh Mi'ayin like all the other Nivroim, and that was a big chiddush by a lot of thinkers, even at the time of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. When I say thinkers, people that tried to battle with concepts al pi Torah. In other words, their picture of Elokus was that David was just incomparably greater than all the values, but he was somehow or another like the greatest value of all the values. So therefore they saw him as being in the whole concept of what we understand, like time or things of that nature. And therefore they grappled with certain ideas. The Maggid was Machadish, this whole idea that Bria, the time is a Bria Yesh Min Ayin, just like the table, or any the clouds, or the Olam HaBria is a Bria Yesh Min Ayin. Since that's a point where up to now that Kaviyochel, the ape, doesn't have anything to do with time. He's not under the whole concept of time. And then all of a sudden he created time. So it doesn't make any sense to ask, why did he do the world at a certain point? Because he himself and the whole aspect of Elokus is beyond time. So therefore says the Rebbe, with that is Maturitz to Kushya. למה ולא בזמן הקודם? והיינו לפי שהקודם שנברו אילום לא יהיה זמן כלל. ואם כן אינו שייך להכשויס. אם כן, doesn't make any sense to ask Akasha. להכשויס means to ask Akasha. למה לא נברו בזמן קודם? מאחר שלא יהיה עוד זמן? כי אם באסכולת הבריאה הסחיל עניין הזמן. אבל therefore it doesn't make any sense to ask why did he do it at a certain time? Because the Abe is not within time. He's not within the whole Inyan. He brought about time. Omnam said the Rebbe, K'moy Kain Yuvan Ba'atzilas. Sheyesh Boi Gam Kain Atzilas Bria Yetzira V'yah. Oh, so now we're going to move into a tricky area. And that is, like we said, Atzilus is like the secret of understanding much of Chassidus is with this whole idea of understanding or having some musig in Atzilus. Because we said that Atzilus is on the one hand divinity, it's Hashem, it's God forbid not creation, that's not a creator being, God forbid Chatzal. It's only different revelations of Hashem within himself. And yet on the other hand, it's for the sake of the creator. I mean, everything that Hashem Kaviyochel brought out in himself was ultimately for the sake of the creation, in a way. But the Inyan of Atzilus is the direct or final step before the actual Yesh Min Ha'ayin. Therefore, we're going to find that on the one hand, Atzilus is beyond time. And yet, on the other hand, there's a beginning of what we can call, in a general way, the concept of time already beginning in Atzilus, because Atzilus is the beginning of the worlds. It's like it's like where the Eibishter is already shaping what's eventually going to be the worlds within his own being. And so that's the union of Atzilus. And therefore, we're going to find an interesting, just like Atzilus is a mamutza, it's like a middle point, and therefore it's got many aspects to it which cause these type of paradoxical combinations in our minds. In the same way with Zman. So he says that we'll be able to understand if we go with that klal, that in Atzilus yesh kamkein Atzilus bria yetzira. In other words, it's going to help us to picture, if we say that the clouds, man begins with the concept of bria, and bria means already a yesh mino ayin. He said if we're going to examine Atzilus, then we'll find even in Atzilus a union of, as it were, relatively speaking, bria yesh mino ayin, and a state which is l'mayla mi bria yesh mino ayin. Abchinas Atzilus shabatzilus hayna bchinas hakeser. He said that the union of Atzilus shebatzilus, the madrega of Atzilus within the oilam of Atzilus, so the Rebbe said that's the union of the rotzing for Atzilus, but that's the union of Keser. The Chachmu Bina hein bria shebatzilus, v'zo yetzira, u'malchus asiya, v'keser Atzilus u'bchinas Atzilus shebea Atzilus. In other words, here we see the most amazing thing, that the majority of Olam Atzilus in its details is not really shaykh be'emes to Atzilus. It's already shaykh to Madregas, what the Eibush has brought about, bedugma, how it's going to be later in the world, Jeshmi Ayin. In other words, that he's preparing already in a more real way, as you might say, in a more specificized way, the whole concept of what's going to be later, Yesh Me'ayin, even within the majority of his mamutza, of his middle point, which is Atzilus. So there we say Chokmo, Bina, and Zoh, which is the Midas, and Malchus, all of them are just parts of that mamutza, mamish, for the sake of the elements. He said, therefore, they are Bria, Yetzirah, Vasiya within Atzilus, but the emerson concept of Nia and Kolol in him is in Keser. So the Rebbe says, Hine inen azman shebatzilus, umibchinas brio shebatzilus. He said, that inen, just like we saw in the Klolos Oilemas, that Zman principally begins from brio. So within Atzilus also, there's going to be an idea of Zman, albeit not Mamish Zman. And he said that's going to begin from Chokma Bina. In other words, that Atzilus is going to be all like leading towards the end of Zman, because as we pointed out, Atzilus is the middle point. And much later on, a little bit further on, we're going to deal more with this whole concept of the middle point, like the concept of what we call Mamutah. All right, so now it says the Rebbe like this. והנה עניין הזמן שבאצילוס הוא בבחינת בריאה, ולא בבחינת זמן ממש, אלא בבחינת סדר זמנים. ומה שיש לזמן מוקים באצילוס, היינו מבחינת בריאה שבאצילוס. או בבחינת אצילוס שבאצילוס, דהיינו בבחינת הכסר, הוא למעלה מהזמן. Now, this expression, yesh seder zmanim, that occurs in the Lashon of our sages in the Medrash. Seder zmanim. So the Medrash says in Medrash Rabbah, the fact that it's written there is ki sheishish yomim, also Hashem as Shamayim v'Sa'oret. So it's written over there, Malamed shahoya seder zmanim koydem lozeh. That before you actually got time as an actual creation, you had like the Eibishter using these midas, and he calls it, like we said, he calls the midas themselves days. I think we already had that, or maybe we had 9 days, something like I forget the different groups that we had in these classes. But we already had that. It's not written ki bisheishes yomim also. Hashem. It's written ki sheishes yomim. Yeah? That each of the midas is like a how do you call it? A day. Yeah? Each of the days rather is a midah. So it's not really a day yet. It's a midah. So the way it is in Atzilus is so it's not a day. So the Medrash learns from that prior to the actual coming about of the actual Bria, that means that there was like Atzilus, the Midas in Atzilus are called literally days. As if that's the case, it's a sign of before creation, which is time also, began, there was a Seder of days. It was hard to say days, which means that you've got like a Seder in Zmanim. So here we see an idea, not Zman in a simple sense, but Seder Zmanim, a order of time. Now, this is what you guys were saying before, but isn't it hard to say that if he did something, that's really like proceeding, having done something else? So, what we're going to do is taina now, that in Atzilus you don't have minutes, and you don't have 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you do hours, and the whole concept of passage of measured time. We're soon going to see measured time. So a different idea. What we have here is like what we call the precedence of certain inyanim prior to other inyanim. And meaning that the Eibishter brought about the Chokhmah Ubina in Atzilus prior to him bringing out the Midas, meaning that the Midas, he wants that they should only be misgaleh through the medium of the Moichin. And after the Moichin of Bina, as it were, then the Midas will come out as a Teitzah from the Moichin. And the Inyan of Malchus will be built from all of them, both from Chokhmah Bina and from Midas, albeit the Ikra from Midas. Of Amela, we're talking about a Seder of what we call Kedima ve'ichur, precedence and latter proceedings. In other words, one thing, and then as of that, a derivation of another thing. Now we said that Lamaila Me'atzilas, that's also not right. You can't say that, because the Rambam calls that Nimtor. It's another level altogether. In Atzilus, it's not measured time. It's not minutes. It's not hours. It's not days. It's not years. But the fact that we call it with a borrowed name days is a sign that there's some form of passage of what you might call order, prior and subsequent. So that idea of prior and subsequent, that's the idea of the beginning of time. Like that's like a precedence, in inverted commas, to the union of time. That's like a leader through which eventually there'll be time. That's the pshat benegeh to Atzilus, and it's hidden in those words Seider's Manim. That's, as I say, that's a lashon of the Medrash in Medrash Rabbah.
Is the Seider's Manim keeps going back and forth, or is it just it happened once?
No. It would seem that for the moment it's progressing.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it goes round in a circle. Well, that's another inyan that we find benegeh to the Bria. That it goes through 6 days, and then we go back to a certain point, and then we begin again, as it were, almost, the Seder of time. Well, that's another thing we'll find once we've already got time functioning, we nonetheless take back to a certain point where we go beyond time. And there it's brought down in Chassidus that really Shabbos is L'mayla mi'azman. The interesting thing is that even though the clock works on Shabbos, to a certain extent you have to daven on Shabbos, you can't daven 2 minutes before the Shkia on Shabbos, Chas v'sholem. You have to be in davening on time and so on and so forth, or at least the Fierachem, and so on and so forth, even on Shabbos. But the truth of the matter is that Shabbos is L'mayla mi'azman, and there is such a thing as Man Krishma, by the way, on Shabbos. Even on Shabbos also is Man Kriyat Shema, but it's written in Atzilus that Atzilus is L'mayla mi'azman. Because it all goes round back into a certain shura, but that's a slightly different idea. Or the way it is in Atzilus is it's like a successive iskalas. And therefore the big Chassidim, they used to do but they didn't get up at 12 o'clock by day or something. They used to be up very early in the morning, but they used to daven, on Siddur on Shabbos they used to daven late. They prepared so much for their davening that they used to daven till late. And so people said to me, wait, what are you doing davening Shabbos at 3 in the afternoon or something? So I would say that Shabbos is l'mayla me'azman. Oh, that's true. It's written in the Siddur. It's written Shabbos l'mayla me'azman. Oh, those were people that they lived be'emes l'mayla me'azman on Shabbos. You understand? Oh, some people say, oh yes, I'm l'mayla me'azman, and really they're very deep inside the pekel of man. So, says the Rebbe, so he says, הנה עניין הזמן שבאצילוס הוא מבחינת בריאה שבאצילוס. לא מבחינת ממש על סדר זמנים, או מה שיש לזמן מוקים בצורה טוב, I'm sorry, או מבחינת האצילוס שבאצילוס, דהיינו מבחינת הכסר הוא למעלה מהזמן. וכמו כן בכל פרצוף, now here we make this more detailed concept of parzuf, that in every group of spheres what inyoni is to produce a certain inyan klali, as we spoke about earlier, shekolo mi'achilas bria yetzira asiya. Each parzuf has got its own achilas and its own bria and its own yetzira. Yeah, in other words, within moichin gufa, then you got achilas, you got pnimis hachokma, and then you got chiteinis hachokma, so the bria and so on and so forth. So he said, Shezeh inyan parzuf shekalu niyud sfiras, that every parzuf has in itself the inyan of 10 sfiras. V'chol echod yekalu mi achilas bria yetzira v'yach. He says that each of the parzuf is kolo me, and even every sphera that appears from that ocean, then in a way you can say that every sphera in a way has got itself Atzilas, Bria, Yetzira, V'yach, Asiya, meaning the different levels within each sphera. He said all of them have got themselves this inyan. Hine b'chinas Atzilas Shaboi Shezeh b'chinas HaKeser Hu L'mayla Me'azman. So Be'ikah we're talking here about the parzufim, that each parzuf has also got itself, and each parzuf has itself bria yetzira v'asiyah, and each parzuf has this rotzen miyuchat for that particular parzuf, what that's inyan of keser. Then it follows that you've got l'mayla mi'azman, and you've got in each of them a beginning of zman, but it's a inyan of what's already like a seder of principality or precedence and subsequent. Yeah, he said, "Avdachila shaboishu b'chinas hakeser hu l'mayla mi'azman." Okay, b'chinas malchus. If we take, for example, the inyan from parzuf of malchus, the yadur the b'chinas malchus hu sheret b'chinas hazman hu makom. Here we meet also with the word mokeh. It's one on the malchus being as it is the shurish of the ashpoya in oilamas, and particularly in oilamas bria tzira v'asiyah oilamas yesh mino ayin. Therefore, the inyan from malchus has in itself the mokeh of zman and also the mokeh of makom. In other words, this concept of what you might call 6 sides, that everything is limited in mailamata and four sides, also begins in Malchus, because the Ikka concept of place is that you have what you might call 6 sides. And where you have 6 sides, then you have place. All of that begins principally in Malchus. Therefore, Malchus is the shurish of Zman and Mokim. Mishkosu Malchuscha Malchus Kol Eilomim. We see that your Malchus Cha, or that when it comes out into our Oram Mimenu, that becomes Malchus Koloi Lomim. It leads to the direct intervention of, you might call it, of Malchus in all the Elam. Meaning that you're like the direct producer and the giver of Chayas to all the Elamim. And that's 2 levels, Malchus Cha and then Malchus Ko Elam. Like we see a king is on the one hand withdrawn, he's on the one hand, united within himself in his own greatness, and then there's an aspect of the king where he devotes himself to all the details of the kingship, and one is dependent in the other because of his withdrawnness and his greatness, and therefore he's able to actually effectively deal with all the details. And the same by the Eibishter. And the Malchus has got a level which is Shaykh Mamish to Atzilus, and then it becomes Malchus Koloi Lomin. And we see Hashem Melech, Hashem Moloch, Hashem Yimlech. We say that in davening, that we see that when we use past, future, or past, present, and future in reference to Elokus, then we do it in reference to the concept of ruling, of kingship, which means that the whole idea of Zman expresses itself principally through the union of Malchus. That's within the Tesfiros, not including Malchus, Sheva Malchus, because that's already got other special properties to it. But he said that's got to do with the Tesfiros, counting from Chochmah down to Yesod, how they are in Malchus. Our Prinus Keser Malchus, on that level which is Keser to Malchus, the Rotzin from the Midas, that there should be Malchus, Hadovuk Tobit Bezor, which is always continually Dovuk in the Midos of Atzilus, in Zor, Hula Maila Miprinus Hazman, it's beyond time. In other words, that even though that's already in Atzilus, and that's already coming from the Midas into Malchus, the Keser of Malchus is a further Gilui of Zor, and Zor is the Indian for Midas. So that's how Keser is developed as almost like a produce in a way of Zor. It's come through the Midas. Nonetheless, we say that it's compared to the Indian of Malchus, it's Lamaila Mia. It's still Lamaila Mia Zman, due to the fact that it's a will. We'll see later on that the Keser B'Komokim is really like a new form of will. But it's a will that comes through the expression of other factors. And therefore the Rebbe says that it's Dovuk Tomid Bezor. Now the reason why we have to say that, the reason why I would suggest that the Rebbe felt necessary to put that bracket in, that this Keser coming from Zor, leading into Malchus, is Dovuk Tomid Bezor. Because if we're going to say that Keser, being rotten, means that it mamish goes in and enters and deals with what it wants in the real way, then it's part of Malchus. As in came, what's this whole idea of Keser being moved out and being separate and being, as it were, not involved in the parcel? And therefore the Rebbe says that even though it's a Keser for Malchus, it's Dovuk Tomid Bezor. In other words, it's Kolul in its Mokir the whole time. And that's what we've been pointing out, that the amazing thing about Rotzen is, on the one hand, it's a maruta, it's a movement and a running towards something, but on the other hand, it's kolul in the etzem. It's only like a hatoya of the etzem mami. And that's the unbelievable paradox of Rotzen. And so that's what the Rebbe says. It is taki a Rotzen for Malchus, but it's dog, tomid be'zor, in order to appreciate the two ruling aspects of Keser. You've got to understand that it's always kalul, like we said, within its mocker. That's what we said before, that the Indian of the Rotzen is really only a hatoya of the etzem. And here we meet up now with the big, what you might call, stretch. Dehine sheirish Indian azman hu mipchinas rotzoi v'shoiv. It's from the concept of rotzoi v'shoiv, running outwards and returning. Rotzoi v'shoiv. U'b'mochi machem avua the b'chinas man hu Indian kedima v'eicho shebesvirei. We've just said in another place, and we've just brought it down quickly, we've suggested that the union of time is due to this concept of precedence and subsequentness. That's what leads to the union of time. So in that case, we're going to have to understand, why do we give two reasons? If it's subsequentness, then why is it Rotzer V'Shoyim? So we're going to see it's two different levels. That subsequentness and precedence, Kadima V'Ichur, they're going to be shy to Atzilus. They're going to be shy to where Mamish within Elokus. And we'll see about that. We're going to meet up with other concepts slightly different than Rotzer V'Shoyim, in a way. The concept of Rotzoi V'Shoiv is more applicable when you've already moved into the Makabel, and the Makabel's already received from Elikus, and he's already Bria, and you want to build Zman within Bria, and he said that's what's going to build itself. So what Rotzoi V'Shoiv is like a what do you call it? An analysis of the situation within a created world which brings Mishman, or which makes Mishman. The Kedima Ve'icho are like on a higher level, what they make Rotzoi V'Shoiv possible. And that's the union of this concept of subsequentness within Olam HaTzila. Now that's what the task that we're going to set ourselves now as we go along. And he said, V'hainu, Shezeu Inyan Azman Beruchnias, B'chinas HaSeidah V'Adroga, the Kedima Ve'icho. Yeah, that we've been saying that the whole Indian of Zman in Ruchnias is this idea of precedence and subsequentness, and that's an Indian of like a form of Seder, and it's an Indian of leveledness, Hadraga, like how do you call it, ladder steps, of Kedima Ve'icho. So if that's the case, then why do we say that it's Rotzoi V'Shoiv? So we're going to see that what we do at the beginning is we somewhat link the idea of Kedima Ve'icho with Rotzoi V'Shoiv, but we're going to see that that's only in the form of like an Asinus Mokev. It's not really Mamish Inyan from Rotzoi V'Shoiv, but it's got itself those Inyanim which eventually make Rotzoi V'Shoiv possible. In other words, even within subsequentness and what do you call it, precedence, or precedence and subsequentness, you can find a certain similarity, so that when you move like into the Makabel Manish, then you'll be able to talk about absolute Rotzoi V'Shoiv. And that's what we're going to do now. We will just read a sentence or two about that, and then we'll complete for this evening. So he says, "Gam zeh hu alidei b'chinas histalkes v'hispashta. The all shaykh inyan kadima ve'ichur." So the Rebbe said it's really very posh. What is Rotzoi V'Shoiv? Rotzoi, now we haven't dealt with the pasuk yet, Achayas Rotzoi V'Shoiv, the actual quote which leads to the concept of Rotzoi V'Shoiv, we're going to deal with God willing tomorrow. For Hashem will give Yizun to Al Inyanim, then we'll learn it tomorrow, and we'll deal in some detail with the pasuk, because the pasuk needs careful understanding. But before we get to that pasuk, because Rotzoi V'Shoiv is even in Olam HaYetzirah, according to certain biurim, or Baruch HaPanim for sure, in Olam HaYetzirah v'Asiyah, and probably also in Olam HaBriah, in Atzilus, and probably maybe in Bria, we have this idea of Kedima Ve'icho. So the Rebbe said, what is Rotzoi V'Shoiv? Rotzoi is running out. It's like a withdrawal from where we are now, but going upwards, Aliyah. Withdrawal in the sense of histalkus klapi maila, and the inyan from shoiv is a return back to where you started. And we're going to be very careful to say we don't mean the same thing. Comes back that also we're going to really go into the careful details here. So what he said, what is Kedima Ve'icho? If you didn't have a certain concept of histalkus and his pashtas, then you wouldn't be able to have this whole idea of precedence and subsequentness. Because just so let's imagine that Chochmah, let's say he took Chochmah, and he said from now on, Chochmah. As Chochmah was just to be Nimshach, Le'olam Voed, would it allow anything else to come in? No way. Chochmah doesn't know anything about anything else. It knows about it. How do you say Chochmah is busy enough with the tone in Yonim? It's about something else. After you've already got the final kavanah of the Eibush and all sorts of other inyanim, then Chochmah is prepared to know about something else. But if you just add the Gilui of Chochmah, Adein Seif, the Bli Shinui, then you have Chochmah. How do you get Bina into the picture if you cause a certain halt in the inyan of Chochmah, a certain withdrawal back into itself of Chochmah? Then you can allow something else into the sea. Because you have to bear in mind that in Atzilus we're talking about B'loi Seif. Each Svira is without end. And that was the whole problem in Tohu. The difference between Tohu and Atzilus is that we didn't allow that to happen. And therefore all of them just kept going. And then Kavion, the Avish brought in other Sviras, and they just all banged they banged and they collided, meaning that all the Ein Sefs couldn't get together. They're all different forms of Ein Sef. They couldn't make it together, but they all just negated one the other. But we're now in Achilas. If I want to make that, I've got now Chokhmah, but I'm going to have Bina also coming into play, then I've got to have a certain withdrawal on the part of Chokhmah, and Bina comes in. Well, that's this idea of like an Aliyah, yeah, and that allows something else to come in. So we begin with this whole idea of, and then the Shoiv will be that Chokhmah will return in a slightly different way. Chokhmah will actually reveal itself now in a way that takes into account, or it reveals in a way towards Bina. We're going to have this idea of like a withdrawal and an end to this one and a beginning to the other, or that end to this one and the beginning of another is like the passage of a moment. It's like, yeah, I finished here, I'm starting over again here. And that's the idea of a moment, of time. So that's the beginning in the higher level of this idea of measurement of time, and it's the beginning of Rotzei V'Shoiv, and Rotzei V'Shoiv is going to lead mamish to measurement of time. And so, but one leads to the other. This Kedim V'Or is like a beginning of Rotzei V'Shoiv. So I think we'll hold there for the moment, and that's what he does now, to unify these two sforas of subsequentness with Rotzei V'Shoiv. So Be'ez Hashem, that brings us to, in a good show, to Omid Mem Beis. But Mem Beis is the Shem Honor B'Koyach, as you all know. And Honor B'Koyach is a big thing.